Welcome to Disrupted Science, the occasional conversation between the authors of the upcoming book, How the Internet Disrupted Science. I'm Joy Moore here with my co author, Kent Anderson, and we're recording this on Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025. Hey, Kent, how's
Hey,
it going?
Joy. It's going okay. We just finished a great interview with Mike Olson at
That
UW-La
was
Crosse.
super fun. Yeah,
If you're listening to this, you've got a good one coming your way.
it's
He was
spicy.
amazing.
These
Well,
librarians have things to say.
he's so smart. I mean, he's so smart and in touch, and his story's interesting. He's interesting. His angle is great. It reminded me there's a line from in our book, um, spoiler alert, that it used to be that people in the tech space said that technology tends towards monopoly just by the scaling of it. And there's a line in our book that we elaborated on that and said technology tends toward governance. And I think this is kind of getting into that, definitely getting into that zone about how the vendors in the library space are using technology to govern what we see and what
Yeah.
we know. And he's got some great stories. So yeah.
And we got to talk about zines,
That was a nice
which,
treat.
yes, which takes me
Good
back.
research on your part.
It's kind of a back to the future thing, and I think it's a good, I didn't want to interrupt the flow, but it kind of when he was talking about zines, and I won't spoil it, but it reminded me that once upon a time, if you needed to learn a paper, if you needed to get a paper from somebody who published it, you could just ask them and they would just send it to you.
Hmm.
You didn't need the whole internet to do
Right,
that.
right. Yeah, it's a great interview. So I think without further ado, we're just going to let people hear from Mike. And again, Mike, thank you. If you're listening to this, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. And here we go. Today, we're talking with Mike Olson, Assistant Professor in Cataloging and Discovery Librarian at the Murphy Library at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Mike published two posts on the Scholarly Kitchen earlier this year that caught our attention. The first was in March when he wrote about library catalogs as colonization systems with the power to make naming decisions appear neutral and inevitable by disguising bias behind what the former ALA president called a facade of technical objectivity. And then his next post in August had to do with layoffs at OCLC justified by claims of advances in AI that could lead to efficiency, quote unquote, right? Mike noted that the same technological advances celebrated for their efficiency are erasing the human expertise that creates the high quality metadata these systems depend on. Joy and I are fans of human expertise, local and disciplinary control, and skepticism about tech claims, so we wanted to talk with Mike. So, hi, Mike. Welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. So, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? What do you do? What is your day job as a professor and a librarian at UW La Crosse? And I have a special question about the zine reading room. So,
Oh,
please
great.
include that in your answer.
Okay, well, I'll try to keep this short, but this has been a long road for me to becoming a librarian and a faculty member here at the university. I have been a staff member in academic libraries for more than 20 years, mostly doing cataloging, digitization, and other labor tasks like that. It's only since COVID that I went to graduate school, got my degree, and got this position where librarians happen to be faculty and also need to publish their research and share information. So I guess I had a sort of a Pollyanna type of an idea that, oh, when I get this role, I'll be able to push all the buttons and have control, and I can implement the alternative classification schemes that I like that would serve our communities better. And I'll be able to make things more discoverable because I'll have access to all the buttons and levers. It didn't take long to learn that because of the vendor consolidation that we're seeing, I don't have a lot of control over the things that we do within the library, and it's getting to be less and less every day. So now I have an increasing awareness that we're basically in academic libraries operating franchises of these corporate information providers, and we get to ask Do you want fries with that? When we have interactions with our students who come to us and say, I can or can't find this in the library catalog. Why is that? Why isn't that? So that's a brief history of the trajectory. As far as the zine reading room, Joy, thanks for asking. So that's been sort of my attempt at an antidote to some of this. It's people powered, it's in real life. I go to Zine Fest, I take my published research, I turn it into zines, and I go to these festivals and trade with other zine makers for their information resources. I bring them back and I turn my office into a zine room. I just put my little desk in the corner, got a bunch of bookshelves in here, and we've got 200 or 300 zines from the last year of going to a dozen zine fests and trading. And now I use these in my information literacy instruction classes to help students think about authority, how it's created, how it's contextual, how information networks can form. Other ways basically to use critical thinking to decide if the information that you're reviewing is valuable for your information need, especially at a time when in our library discovery system, the little filtering systems and widgets and checkboxes are really no longer reliable to tell us what's authoritative. And this is due to the wealth of records that CDI dumps into the catalog that are often not verified or checked, or may look like they have real resources when in fact there are now scam journals in what should be authoritative databases. So the zine reading room is my attempt. It's just, of course, it's not going to replace the other system, but it's a way to try to just try to stop some burnout, frankly, and to have some real interaction with people about things that is more within our control.
So can you, I'm really curious about Zine Fest now. So how do people find out if there's a Zine Fest near them?
Oh, well, here I'm looking at, there's a board behind me with all the different flyers and things. So every state has a zine festival at this point. Zines were a big deal. Well, for me, going to college in the 1990s, zines were a thing back then, and they kind of went underground for a bit. And now in the 21st century, we're seeing a real resurgence of physical media. Physical media
I
is
saw
political.
something about that recently with this, like the newest, coming of age generation are discovering things like print and
And
not
vinyl.
smartphones and vinyl.
That's
And
right.
yeah, wow.
It's one of the few things that's giving me hope these days is to see that there's a generation of younger people that some of them are really interested in refusing the AI or in ownership of their media and in creating media. And I think that's something I'm really trying to get across in these classes with the zines is that, gosh, we're not just information consumers. You need to be an information creator. Knowledge is constructed. It's not something that's just handed to you, but of course our Google and our library catalogs are really turning into answer generators and not things that deliver sources that we get to verify any longer, really.
Right. So you had a couple of historical nods in your pieces to Celeste West and the Revolting Librarians and also to Foucault. And I wondered if you could just elaborate on those and what you called the invisible violence of metadata. If you could, that's a useful way to frame a portion of this.
It is. There's such a history of, so classification is hierarchical, that's just by its very nature. And hierarchies can lead to marginalization. That's also part of their nature. And so there's been a history of what you would call radical catalogers over the years, from Sanford Berman back in the 70s, who really kind of got the ball rolling with many requests to the Library of Congress to update subject headings that he felt were pejorative, that had bad language in them for our users. And then people like Celeste West and the Revolting Librarians, they didn't.
And can you just explain the Revolting Librarians for those who haven't read your piece
they were
and know what they did?
It's a verb, not an adjective. Right?
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Well, but I think they were definitely using that wordplay. Like not many librarians really, even to this day, want to fall back on the idea of libraries are neutral. We just have information, and the Revolting Librarians were really trying to get out in front of that and say, no, information is political by its nature. Classification is political. Collecting and how information is collected and organized is political by its nature. And so for them to say they were revolting, well, they were revolting against those ideas. And they also knew that many within the profession, especially back in the 70s and 80s, were revolted by librarians who were feeling this way. So they have a book that collects essays from different of these revolting librarians that talk, and really it's almost like a zine culture back then, because these things were shared through different library publications, like Synergy is one of them, and there are others that were passed around. And this is how librarians formed this alternative network and started to share some of these more radical ideas that have been carried forward through the generations up until now.
Awesome.
Yep. So, and then there were layoffs at OCLC earlier this year.
Right. So,
and Violet Fox was one of the individuals caught up in this, and she was.
Well, she didn't work at OCLC. She's at Northwestern,
okay.
But I guess maybe I need to frame this from the standpoint of, so, as somebody who's new to the tenure track of a faculty role, we need to publish. And so I've published a couple things in journals in the last couple of years, but as I've seen you talk about on other of your podcasts, who's reading these journals these days? What is the impact of publishing in a journal, especially in our current environment of academic publishing? So despite the advice of some other members of my department and our chair that, well, if you publish on an online platform, it's not going to count for your tenure. But in January, when the Trump administration had the executive order to rename Mount Denali to Mount McKinley and to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, we saw that the geographic heading section of the Library of Congress, which is an administrative branch of the government, made those changes within a couple of weeks. So we need to put this in the context of people like Sanford Berman and the revolting librarians. They spent years, sometimes petitioning Congress to make changes to subject headings. And here these changes happened in less than a month after they were created by executive order. This was a really frustrating thing for librarians. And so to write an academic paper about it is great, but it's not urgent enough. So this is all just to say that this was me kind of trying to be strategic or be experimental. And I reached out to different platforms, and the Scholarly Kitchen was the first that was interested in this, how this affects scholarly communication. So I guess I'm just saying all that to say that a lot of this is motivated by frustration and by feeling like we don't have the agency that we'd like to have in our profession, because we're kind of becoming tech support for digital capitalism. So this ties into OCLC because they announced earlier this year that they were laying off 80 workers, and at the same time, they are developing AI to generate metadata. So Violet Fox comes into this because Northwestern was laying off a few hundred workers, and she happened to be one of the workers that was laid off. Now, of course, they don't say why she was chosen to be laid off over someone else, but in the realm of critical cataloging, in the realm of the revolting librarians, Violet Fox is the champion of our day. I mean, she's created the cataloging lab. She has pushed forward so many initiatives to do reparative cataloging, to create alternative classification systems. So to see her let go from a job at a place like Northwestern, one could only speculate why her, why now, but it certainly seems to fit in with this broader picture that we're seeing of expertise being not something that libraries or platforms are interested in, now that we can just press a button and AI can do things for us.
Right. You also talked about how these, there's kind of a civil war between chatbots and filters and all these things. You talk about how some of the concepts that you would normally expect to be in a discovery hierarchy or system aren't allowed because they're too touchy for various AI systems and their content filtering layers. So because they're optimized for social media chatbots, right, and they cut things out that might be legitimate areas of research and legitimate areas of academic thought, but they cut them out. Can you talk a little bit about some of those examples you found and why this matters?
Well, so I'm relying on the research of Aaron Tay, who's a librarian in Singapore.
That's right.
Did some pretty great testing on the Primo Research Assistant. We were also able to test it here. We haven't chosen to turn it on yet, but like many of these updates or features, they're typically.
So can you just back up a little? So
Yes.
the Primo Research Assistant is what?
It's a discovery overlay that is going to be integrated into, so Primo is the discovery service of what we would once think of as our library catalog, that
Okay.
now includes many things more than the resources that are just within libraries. It gets dumped in with what's called CDI, the Central Discovery Index, which is an aggregation of tons of vendor records, many of them generated by artificial intelligence that get put into library catalogs. So that's one issue. And to think about humans who maybe have not even seen that data and it just gets put in the catalog. So that's one thing that was very frustrating and stressful to learn about. Well, so one of the features of this Primo discovery interface is this research assistant, which is currently optional. But like many features, there will be a deadline, probably sometime next year, where it's just going to be turned on for everyone. So this has many issues because a user must sign in to use it. And then when they do, as you mentioned, it's a chatbot algorithm. Okay, so it isn't searching the catalog in the way that a researcher or a librarian would expect by keywords, subjects. It is doing a filtering, and we don't know how it's working. This is all happening inside a black box, and it returns results or not based on what that algorithm, which is developed to mediate social media, not scholarly knowledge, and it's just being shoved into this other infrastructure. And what that means is many results, what Aaron Tay found was searching for topics or words like Gaza war, massacre, Tulsa race riot, would return no results and would share no information about why no results were returned, when we know that there are many thousands of results on these topics. So discovery is going to be fundamentally broken. So what does that mean for information discovery? That's a form of censorship. It's a form of information control. And when Aaron Tay posted these results, the people from Clarivate reached out and said, oh, well, they can turn the filter, and it was on medium, so now we'll set it to low, so you'll get more results. Okay, great, but that still brings up that we're not in control of that. Libraries don't have control of that. We are, again, just operating this vendor platform, right? We can make the fries crispier, or we can make them less crispy, but we're still making the fries over here. And I didn't go to library to school to try to be tech support for digital capitalism, which is the role that we're being shoved into as our expertise is devalued and devalued.
Right. You also mentioned one other thing that I want to pause on, which is that, say this Primo is turned on, people have to sign into it. So there's potentially a surveillance aspect to that.
Oh,
That was much clearer when something like the Patriot Act was being proposed after 9/11, but now it's being baked into technology as part and parcel of AI systems that have to surveil what users are doing in order to get more tokens because they're geared to get more tokens. Does that seem like a fair way to describe what might happen?
I certainly think it does. So there's something, maybe we're aware of the knowledge pyramid, this idea, there's data, there's information, there's knowledge, and there's wisdom. It's this pyramid that we've taught students over the years about how to use information. I think we're going to have to put an all-seeing eye at the top of this pyramid now, because all we get and all we look for are answers. And the answers that we're getting are also watching us.
Right.
So instead of being a participant in finding data, using information to create knowledge, to generate wisdom, you just put in a natural language query, you get an answer, and you're surveilled while you do it. So I'm suggesting we need to update this knowledge pyramid with an all-seeing eye at the top, just to remind us of this gigantic shift that is sort of all happening behind the scenes, like you said, Kent, that it's just baked in now. These aren't things that we can usually even opt out of. Typically, they're things we just are opted into, and maybe we can turn them off and maybe we can't.
Can we call the ISAR on, please?
But let me just clarify to make sure that I understand, because I use a university library to do research. And so Primo is the gateway. It's the authentication layer that lets me do a search across the holdings, but it's also I think where I tell them who I am and why I have the right to look at their holdings. And so it is kind of it's a twofold operating system for libraries where it doesn't it's just showing you what's there on top of other things that are there, but it's also the authentication layer to let them know that you're a qualified user.
Right. It's an ILS. It's an integrated library system. It's also the back end for how we catalog records, for how we create
Mm-hmm.
user profiles, for who has what permissions to do what on that back end. So it's an entire
It's a
environment.
utility, right?
That's
Yeah.
right. And it's so what I found was fascinating. So I went last year to one of the first conferences I needed to go to, the Ex Libris Users of North America conference. So this is a conference where Ex Libris,
Mm-hmm.
Clarivate, who does Primo and Alma, which is the back end, and then the users of that. So what was really eye-opening at this conference was that Ex Libris, of course, all of their presentations were about how AI is coming to all parts of this platform, to the integration, to the customer service, to the discovery, to the cataloging, and how great that's going to be. And then concurrent with this, there were sessions from libraries from across the country. All the librarian sessions were about how this platform doesn't work. Like we've been asking them to do the most basic things for years. It won't surface a result that I have in my hand that I know is in our catalog, but it's 10 things down on the list of results. And we're not able, oh, we've opened how many tickets to do it. And so the contrast was stark at this conference. And speaking of revolting librarians, there was a point during the keynote where the heads of Clarivate were talking about this AI and to a room full of hundreds of librarians. I mean, it was kind of a hostage situation with a catered lunch, frankly, because
And probably
we're
not a
all,
great one either.
yeah, no, I don't remember. Yeah. So, we're all in this room and we're getting this very flashy pitch and everything. Well, multiple librarians eventually stood up and said, we don't want AI. We want the platform to work. We want the issues that we've had with it for years to be resolved. That's what we
Mm-hmm.
want. And to see other members of your field standing up during a keynote and interrupting it, almost a dead poets society
Right.
moment,
Standing
where
on
they're
the
like, yeah, get
desks.
it. People are
Yeah.
saying, no, we don't want what you're selling us.
Right.
Um, so that's just to say there's this real, for me and for many of us in the field right now, there's a real disconnect between our values, why we got into this work,
Mm-hmm.
and the material conditions of our labor.
Mm-hmm.
So we spend a lot of our time drafting documents to suggest responsible ways to integrate AI, to try to get the vendor to do. Well, they're not listening to these documents. They have their business model. The things that
Mm-hmm.
we think are bugs about their business model, in fact, are features of their business model.
Hmm.
Uh,
Right.
so
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, Cory Doctorow has written about the enshittification of the internet, and I think this is part and parcel of that. And I've noticed that even, I've used Macs for a long time, just exclusively, and even just native search on my own Mac has degraded because they've souped it up so that it has some image recognition and things like that. So, if I label a picture or something with a word, knowing that that word is unusual for me to use, so later it'll be easy to find, they will process pictures with things of that word that have nothing to do with, and I have to go through a whole long list because, there's pictures of a dog. And it's like, I only named these pictures dog, but you have pictures of all sorts of things with dogs in them. And now it's cluttering. And I think that same thing is happening where they think they're being smart, but they're really degrading and making far less useful the infrastructure we want to use just to get our work done, right?
yes,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're being sold this bill of goods that AI is a labor-saving device, and especially as we see in cataloging. So I mentioned in the article, the Library of Congress did a study to see how AI could do with cataloging, doing the intellectual labor of applying subject headings and the things that humans do. It scored 26%, which is an F.
Hmm.
So, that's not
That's a
great.
low F. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but for our vendors, that's good enough, I guess, because they think it's going to save labor, when in fact the pitch to us at these conferences is, don't worry, librarians will be overseeing all this. A
Hmm.
human, which
Yeah.
can't, just like you had to do, this is actually more labor. Now we have to go back and find all of the problems, all of the issues, and then probably open a ticket and not actually have the wherewithal. Imagine if on your computer, every time you wanted to change where it says dog, or you didn't want it to say dog, you have to contact the software administrator
Right.
and write an email about it and wait a week. And so libraries around the country, around the world are all, this is what the conference brought to the fore, was that hundreds, thousands of librarians are dealing with these same problems in hundreds
Mhm.
of different ways all around the world, and the vendor is doing nothing about it. So,
And it's
how is this
interesting that
saving
humans
labor?
had to get together for the vendor to see that, right? Because they've created a blind spot in their own culture where they aren't actually
I don't think
testing.
they're interested in seeing that, to be honest.
No, no, that's
I don't think they are.
No,
Their business plans are already set. They are marching towards
an inevitability.
their an inevitability and leaving the people, the humans, to deal with the fallout. Um, I wanted to get you to talk a little bit more about, because I hadn't thought about it until I read your pieces, but information labor and the critical cataloging. People who do this expertly have been creating metadata for the record that is now being ingested into machines. Um, so, can you just give a little bit more
sure.
color on what you're talking about in terms of information labor and critical cataloging?
Yes. Well, so this is where OCLC would come into this in a big way. So they've been a cooperative cataloging organization for years. They are the largest provider of bibliographic records to libraries and information providers internationally. And that's where records are created. As a librarian, you have access. We pay fees to use this service, and we can create records within that. And you can, add your subject headings and do whatever else. The issue that comes in is once you upload it to OCLC, they add an OCLC number to it.
Mhm.
Litigation has decided that that's enough to call it I forget the lingo of the law, but that is a substantive change, and now OCLC owns that data.
So it's
And then we as
proprietary, right?
libraries say that,
So it's proprietary data now.
right, even though we created it. So now,
Mhm.
so the model then is that libraries lease back their own information from
Ah,
this. So,
gotcha.
so here's this thing that was built with the cooperative cataloging labor. It really started off as an idea for everybody to contribute. You used to get credits for contributing to this database, but now, and probably, part and parcel because of their litigation with Clarivate, who wanted to use their records and wasn't able to, uh, they make it very difficult for libraries to retain ownership of their metadata, right? So there's many workarounds for this, depending on the systems people use. People can add different subject headings. There's some stuff in that article that other people have done. There's many very robust alternative classification systems where people can use not just Library of Congress terms that may not be the best for the communities they're trying to describe, but they can use community-derived terms. And there's some really
Mhm.
robust schema like this. It's just that, again, this interplays with the issue of once they're uploaded to OCLC and they're
Mhm.
shared, now we just are in the position we can just lease that information back. That's
Yeah.
not a great model for open sharing of knowledge.
Right. And it seems to be part and parcel with the whole AI labor market because there's the whole, what they call reinforcement learning from human feedback, which has been found to be exploiting workers in Kenya and Venezuela and other places with gig work, where they, and other authors have written about how inside of every AI system are a bunch of humans that never get credit and their work is exploited by those systems. And so I think that's, it's interesting how labor is becoming a real issue for these providers. The other thing that has come up since we and on the runway up to this, to talking with you, is the idea that doing bibliographic searches with AI is a substitute for real human digging through the stacks. And is it? And I was just reading authors of the book, The AI Con, and they were talking about how doing that is an abrogation of the academic bargain. You're supposed to be familiar with the sources that you're citing, that you're putting into a bibliographic stack and then using to process. You're not just gathering them to show them off. So are you noticing a hearing back from patrons or noticing any changes in patron behavior around these systems?
Definitely. So since the article in August, a couple of really disturbing things have happened. So within the same week, so what you're talking about in our field, we call information literacy, right?
Yeah.
How to evaluate sources, how to trace
Right.
citations, how to check credentials. How do we know that what we're looking at is a valuable source? So this is what we teach our students. So what happened a couple of weeks ago was at a different campus here, a student came to the research desk with a resource they'd found in the catalog in the Primo discovery layer for a journal, for an article that was really good for their research. But when they started to look deeper into the article and look at the references, it turned out 85%, I think 5 of the 32 references were real. 85% of them were fake. And this is in a journal that has a DOI, it has a cross-ref metadata, it has ISN registration, and it's, again, just pulled in by the Central Discovery Index and dumped in our catalog. So in a way, it was a good story because it shows this student, this undergraduate, is using their information literacy skills.
Yeah. So the student is the one who figured out that all the references were fake.
Right. So,
Great.
So it takes a human to call BS.
That's right. And so, but what happened? So, so they, now they've brought this in to the whole library system, and who, we understand this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because if these things can pass all the verifications that the vendor has, ISSN, DOI, Crossref, the discovery system indexing, and still end up in our catalog, how can it completely invalidates the work that the library is trying to do? Again, it's this franchise model. Now we are just the vendors of that. So I want to put that against. A couple days later, I got an email from Clarivate notifying us that at the end of October, AI-generated metadata will be used in all of their ebook records for their ProQuest database. It's opt-in. We can go and find the location to turn it off temporarily, but this is what's happening. So those two things in the same week, much like the experience at the eLuna conference, showed this stark difference, right, in the reality and in the idea of what the vendor is trying to do.
Wow.
Disturbing.
Yeah, it's we're seeing all sorts of stuff like this, and these are great stories to share. So I guess my maybe final question, I don't know, we'll see where we go from here, but where do we go from here?
What would you like to
see happen?
Gosh, there's so many people so much smarter than me working so hard on these issues. I think what I'm seeing when I go to these conferences, when I talk to my colleagues, is, again, many librarians, many information workers at many institutions are dealing with these problems, and they're all doing it on their own. We all have different contracts with these vendors. These vendors at this point are almost a monopoly. Some stats say that Clarivate is 70 to 85% of the academic library market. These contracts are not easy to get into. They're not easy to get out of. The same with OCLC and how they have ownership of our metadata. This is going to require a coordinated, it requires organizing. This is a labor issue, and it needs organizing from the laborers. It's going to require hundreds of libraries and thousands of librarians to band together and say, we refuse this. We refuse these unless you can show us that your records meet these criteria, then we don't want to use your software. And I think there's some examples of places trying to do this. Australia was able to start to divest some from OCLC because they have a national library that can help support that. In our country, I think, the divide and conquer mentality of our information overlords is working really well for them. So there's not an easy answer. So we mentioned the zine room at the start of the conversation. That's not a solution, but for me, it's been something of a local model that at least we
Hmm.
can show that this, I'm able to demonstrate to my students that, well, I, each of these zines I've collected in here represents an interaction with a human being that
Yeah.
actually created this. And so, you know, is that the same as a peer authored journal or an authoritative? No, that's not going to replace all the databases that we need to use. We still need that. And we need to do the work to figure out how librarians and librarianship can be a profession and not just a supplicants for this information
Hmm.
digital economy that we work in. But at the same time, you know, again, I'm tired of banging my head against the wall of these software infrastructure. So this is my attempt to interact with people in real life, in real time, who are creating information resources, usually for a specific community, which is also what
Hmm.
cataloging does, you know, and to use their language and their information to respect their process. And then when students come in, they get to hold something and look at it and use their own critical thinking to decide, well, is this person a reputable source? You know, maybe their
Hmm.
experience with a mental health crisis has more valuable information than the academic journal article that they found in our discovery service, especially if we can't even trust if they're real anymore, you
Hmm.
know? So
Hmm.
that's the short answer, but
Yeah.
you know, there's all these things, there's this big circle of things that we have concerns about, and a much smaller circle of things we can control, and then a
Hmm.
little bit bigger circle of things maybe we have influence on. So I guess I'm now trying to focus on this influence, and I'd like to encourage students that you're an information creator and you're doing this to reach people, to have a
Hmm.
community. So, you know, zines can help us to build that community, which is also what we need in the library world. And if I can go on a little more, I think what we need to do is start telling students about this stuff. We need to make it explicit
Hmm.
what these systems are doing. You know,
Hmm.
we're kind of hiding behind the vendors and trying to maintain our expertise in a situation that's untenable at this point. You know, maybe information literacy needs to shift to, listen, uh, here's what these vendors are doing. Here's the systems that you're using. This is going to require you to take more effort to help to vet these things. And what is your generation going to do about this? You know,
Hmm.
this is an ongoing thing. And so I think if we don't raise awareness about that to people, and we're just helping to deliver them the resources they need to get their assignment solved, we're doing a disservice to our population and to our democracy, frankly.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well put. I agree. And yeah, that's so this is part of that. So we're really glad that you
Yeah.
were able to join us today because we're going to get this out to as many people as we can. And you've articulated some really key issues and told some stories we really wanted to hear. So thank you for doing that. And we're going to move on now with a really hard segue to discoveries of the week. All right. So we're going to do discoveries of the week. Mike, do you want to kick us off? Do you have a discovery of the week, something that you wanted to share?
I do. One came to mind immediately, and I have to say it's a bit fraught with some of the things that we're talking about. So, you know, last week,
Perfect.
some information circulated that's been going around for a couple of years about the Three Gorges Dam in China and how it's thrown the Earth's rotation off by a couple of centimeters. So when I first heard that, it very to me and thought about the discovery of the week, it encapsulated some of the things that we're talking about today, right? That these gigantic consolidations of power in one place have really kind of shadow effects on things we're not even able to foresee until later. Now, when you look a little deeper into the claims about that, it's uncertain whether it made the days a little bit shorter or a little bit longer, but the point still stands that, you know, having something that's this powerful have changes that we were unforeseen is something
Hmm.
that I think relates to our conversation. But it was interesting. I was so excited to hear about that and so sort of terrified of it. And at the same time, well, there's also some information to unpack there too. So it kind of goes along with our information literacy conversation.
Right. So it's enough water and density to offset tidal forces a little bit. That's pretty
Right.
amazing. Yeah.
Wow.
Happening in our sphere over here in the library. But
Yeah. Joy, do you have one?
I do. So I was in preparing for this realized I don't know anything about Wisconsin. I've never been there. I've just been Wisconsin adjacent, about Chicago, and I know people who've been there. And so I was looking up the history of La Crosse, Wisconsin, and there's a wonderful information page that I think your library contributed to, Mike, that gives a lot of the indigenous history as well as kind of how La Crosse came to be and what the major um, trades were and things like that. Um, and then as I was reading that, it made me and reflecting on a lot of the things that you've written about, and also just looking at what Anita Chan has written about, and we talked to her a few weeks ago. It made me think about where I live, which is in Williamsburg, Virginia, which is known as being Colonial Williamsburg, as it was branded by the Rockefellers when they created this vacation destination for history. So all that is to say, through looking at, trying to learn about Wisconsin, thinking about colonialism through what it means in terms of categorizing things and labeling things for the future, I realize I need to learn a lot about where I live. And I and not through the normal, the normal avenues, the normal sources. So that was my inspiration.
We're going to lose Joy down some rabbit holes now.
I'm going down the rabbit
Speaking of
holes.
rabbit holes, this reminds me of you finding that, or one of your last guests saying about the creatures that lived in your neck of the woods, and you had to go find out.
Yeah, the catamounts. I had to go find out about those. Yeah, that was Anita, or no, it was Iris and
Olivia.
Olivia.
Yeah,
It was
Olivia.
Olivia who brought it up. That's right. So, but speaking of that, so I'm going to go back to that neck of the woods in Vermont. We went to go see the cow plop contest, and that same day we had we went through Rutland, Vermont, and some other towns, and we kept coming across Norman Rockwell signs. So we had some friends over for charcuterie and light alcohol, and sit and chat. And I mentioned, so why are we seeing all these Norman Rockwell signs? I thought he was a Stockbridge, Massachusetts kind of guy. And they're like, oh no, he was up here for years and years. In fact, there's an interesting story that one of his paintings, and it's one I'll try to put in the video. It's a very famous one of a soldier and a dad on the sideboard of a car with the dog's head on the boy's lap, and they're saying farewell or something like that. It's a very, very touching, emotional, highly saturated painting of his, and you've seen it a million times, I'm sure. But apparently that a person in Rutland was the boy in the painting. And so after Norman Rockwell sold it, and it was photographed by the Saturday Evening Post and was made a cover, he brought the painting back and gave it to the boy, who grew up, married, had his own kids, blah, blah, blah. But he was also a painter, the kid was. And he would often go out and work on things and all of this. And so when he died, they found the painting in his studio and they donated it to the museum in Stockbridge. And an expert looked at it one day and said, that painting doesn't look right. That does not look like a Norman Rockwell. But they had all the receipts of transfer and everything, so it was all legally, traceable back to Norman Rockwell signing it over to him and him signing it to the museum and all this. So they were like, no, it's real. We've got it all here. Here's the bill of lading. Here's the signatures and all that. And the expert's like, yeah, I don't know. So time passes. The man dies. There was a divorce, and then the man died, and the family was going through his workspace, his studio, and they were, taking things down, and they like knocked on a panel, and it was like hollow where it shouldn't have been. And then it moved, and they peeled it back, and there were a number of paintings, stretched canvas paintings lined up down this little channel. They pull it out, and there it is, the original of that. And what they figured is when they were going through the divorce, the dad had been out in his studio recreating that painting so his wife wouldn't get it. And by that time, she'd also died. So they sold it, I think. So they went to the museum and said, "Your expert was right." Ta-da! And the expert's like, "Yeah, told you so." But human expertise again. And then I think the museum bought it for $15 million, and the kids got the money, and that's how it wrapped up. But it was just a great little fireside story over charcuterie and Sam Adams.
Wow.
So yeah, it was great, but it was also a human expertise story that I liked a lot. So that's what I wanted to bring for my discovery of the week. So, all right, Mike, this is fantastic. It's really great to make your acquaintance, and thanks for joining us today. And we will wrap up now and stop recording, and then we'll get this
Thank you
posted later
so
today.
much, Mike. That was very enlightening, and I think we've got a lot to take away from your conversation.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun talking with you both today.
Well, there we go. That was a great interview, huh?
It was. I hope you
Yeah.
guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, so we're going to leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to our friends at Provoke the Truth for the music. And as always, let us know what you think. You can reach us at disruptedscience@gmail.com. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.